Good afternoon to everybody. Well, I didn't ask, how long?
I'll give you an hour and 22 minutes.
Wow. Generous.
Except for those that got a dentist appointment.
So let me tell you a little bit more about myself, besides the fact that I work at CenterstateCEO. Let me see if I can find the right thing to hit here and advance it. I come from the car culture. I'm a baby boomer, like all of you, right? And I grew up, okay, sorry, younger one, but for those of us who are older. I grew up in a place called Woburn, Massachusetts, which is up there in the left-hand corner. Woburn is 12 miles northwest of the city of Boston. And if you know anything about, wouldn't know much about Woburn, but if you know anything about Woburn, it's the confluence of two major highways. That somebody designated Route 95, forget it. If you grew up in Woburn, Massachusetts, that's Route 128, America's Technology Highway. We are proud of that fact. And 93 ran through the east. So I grew up in a community that was a suburban community that had fantastic highway access, okay? The little picture on the left, which is not a really great one, but that's Polaroid Corporation. My dad worked at Polaroid for 30 years. I got to work there one summer. And if you drove 128, it was spectacular. Because what you saw was high-tech company after high-tech company lined up on that highway. And Raytheon was there, and high-voltage engineering, and ion physics. Just driving down that street was just a spectacular thing if you were a kid growing up, to show you what the potential of jobs and technology were. And of course, the thing on the right, that's a 1967 Mercury Cougar. It's blue, it's got a vinyl top. That was my first car. Not that one, mine didn't look that good. Mine was a little more beat up, but there it is, right? So you guys like to all kind of sing now, Born to be Wild by Steppenwolf. I know you all know it, don't tell me you don't. Right? That's from our era, the car culture. I bring that up with you to talk a little bit about culture, my own cultural bias that I bring into this room. I grew up in a place, if anybody would love highways, it would be me, okay? Because that's what I grew up with. And it was a great place and a great time. Before 128 was built, Woburn was known as a place for farms, for tanneries. Our sports teams are called the Tanners. We made leather in Woburn. And piggeries. Sorry, but that's what we did. That all got replaced when 128 went through. And now, as you drive through it, it's a city that's really done extremely well. So when you think about that cultural piece, about kind of where you come from, might impact how you think about this problem. The folks, the building on the left is the Hampton Inn out on 7th North Street. So if you go out to the town of Salina, they're very similar to what happened to them is what happened to Woburn. It's the same story. Route 81 got built, and places that were farmland suddenly became places that were centers of commercial development. It took off, it grew. But in the city of Syracuse, when 81 was built, the population declined. Doesn't mean it declined because of 81, but the same time that 81 was built, the population declined, the economy headed south, and so folks in the city tend to feel a lot less affection for that highway than perhaps folks out in the suburbs do. And you have to remember, there's also the charged issue that it went through the 15th ward of the city of Syracuse. So it removed a lot of the African-American neighborhood that was there at the time and was replaced by Interstate 81. So those are, it just kind of, it impacts the way you think about things. There's the demographic change. Manlius, and over a period of 60 years, going back to 1950, probably the time that the highway was conceptualized and designed, the population tripled through the 60 years. Look at the population of Clay. went up 8 times over the period that the highway's been there. And look what happened to the population of the city. They lost 75,000 people that moved out of the city. So that's why you might have some different thoughts about how the impact of that highway is. And it didn't just affect the city. On the left is a postcard view of Electronics Park, home of General Electric. At the time that that was designed, there were 20,000 people who worked at GE. Today, at Lockheed, there's about 1,700, and there's probably about 300 in the other places that are out there. So the employment population in that center core went from, just in that one place, 20,000 down to 2,000. What happens with the high-tech development that has spun off over the years from places like GE? There's Infocon in DeWitt. Where's Anarin? It's in DeWitt, right? Where are all these, where's SRC? Up in its main headquarters is in Cicero, right off of 481. Then think about where the distribution folks went. They used to be on the north side of the city and in Mattydale and areas like that, and there's still some of that there in Liverpool, but most of it moved east. So you go out Northern Boulevard, and what do you see? You see distribution, you see manufacturing, you see warehousing. Where's UPS? Where's FedEx? Where are those big generators of traffic and truck demand? They moved east to 481. Just saying that does build the basis as to why perhaps, if you're thinking about where the major highway would be, it might shift to the east as opposed to being the traditional center core, because the economic geography of Onondaga County has changed. That's not something nobody caused that. Highways didn't cause it, but that's the way it is. So let's think about some of the options. This is just review. You've probably read and seen this so many times you're tired of it. Okay, the first option is the elevated viaduct. There it is. Okay, that says simply take down the existing viaduct and replace it with a new one through the center of the city.
Excuse me. You're taking that down. What are you doing with the traffic that would be there? They're gonna keep that old passage while they're building the new passage, or are they gonna have to use 481 to?
They're gonna have to use 481. That's why
Basically the grid.
in any project, they're going to build out the 481 improvements first. Because yes, the traffic has to go somewhere for the period of construction, because when this comes down, it will be gone for 2 years. And I'll show you a little bit more about that. Now, there's a couple of things that you need to know about putting up a new viaduct that maybe isn't well understood. A lot of people said, why don't you just put it back up again? The same thing. You can't. You can't because the Federal Highway Administration won't let you. At the end of the day, the Federal Highway Administration, which is part of USDOT, is going to pay or could pay up to 80% of this project cost. So when the Federal Highway Administration says you can't do something, you got to listen to them. And why can't you do what you might want to do? Because the old 81 no longer meets today's highway standards. In fact, at the confluence where you get 81 and 690, the accident rate at that intersection is 4 times the accident rate on highways in New York State. Why is that? Well, you all know it. If you're coming out of the hill and you're headed up what would have been the on-ramp coming up here, what do you run into? Traffic that is trying to get off at 690 and the traffic weaves. Where the highway is now, it curves. You can't see very far down the highway, so if there's trouble in front of you, you get pretty close to it before you can see it, right? And there's no breakdown lane. If you break down, you're stuck in the travel lane. There's no place to go. So the Federal Highway is saying you can't build a highway like that anymore. So the highway, if it goes back up, has to get wider and straighter, okay? Wider because they want a breakdown lane that has to be added in both sides. and it has to get straighter because they want to get rid of that curvature as you go around the city. So they want it to go more straight toward the city. So this is doing more of this than what the old one used to do like that. And the problem is when you do that, you have to start demolishing all the buildings that are alongside the highway. And so that's one of the costs that comes with building viaduct. Also noted that they got rid of the weaving. You see that there's now a left exit. You go out the left side to get to 690 East rather than what you do today. So that'll stop this. And people coming up this ramp will not be able to get on 690 here.
You won't be able to get on the 690 East?
You won't be able to get onto 690 East, no, because by the time you come up, the ramp's already gone by. So you got to understand, that's the viaduct is going to change. What would be built is going to change. And wider and straighter is the basic message. And that's when you hear about people not liking the viaduct, that's one of the reasons they don't like it, because they don't like, if it could just stay in its current path, they might be okay with it. But the idea that you're going to have to take down pretty much the northeast corner of downtown and the southwest corner of the north side, it doesn't sit too well with some folks relative to viaducts. So there it is, full reconstruction, build it to today's standards. It will maintain the highway speed through the city. It's 10 to 20 feet wider than the existing viaduct that's south of Harrison, and then substantially wider and higher between Harrison and Genesee Street. Takes down 24 buildings. It will cost $2.2 billion to build. That's the latest estimate, and 6 years to complete. So that is the viaduct solution as it's still on the table. Now, another reason people don't love the viaduct in Syracuse is because it's ugly. It is. It's dark, right? It feels dangerous if you walk under it. It's not a comfortable place. Viaducts don't have to be like that, okay? So I'm showing you two of my favorites. Again, I'm from Boston, so there on the right, that's the Zakeen Bridge in Boston. It was built as part of Boston's Big Dig, and it's a fantastic bridge. That's when you heard people talk about an iconic bridge structure that might replace the viaduct. That's what they have in mind, something like that. And over to the left is one of my favorites. It's Columbus, Ohio. And in Columbus, Ohio, they have a viaduct that brings major road and highway traffic into the city, but it has a very low profile. As you go through, you really don't see it, particularly at night. You see how it disappears, but it's in a spectacular park with pedestrian and bike paths that were built around it. It doesn't look anything, hopefully that's not me, it doesn't look anything like our viaduct, right? It really looks nice. Now, any viaduct that goes over water looks a heck of a lot better than ones that go over land. That's just the way it is. But you don't have to have an ugly viaduct. We happen to have a kind of a utilitarian viaduct when it was built. Option 2 is the community grid. The community grid eliminates all the highway infrastructure involved. This is Almond Street. If you travel below the highway, that's the major road that's underneath the highway. And what the community grid suggests is that you would have 2 lanes northbound and 2 lanes southbound on Almond Street. Of course, the highway comes down to grade and passes by downtown and University Hill at grade, not up in the air. And you have bike lanes, you can see there. You have this big wide median to separate the traffic. You have large sidewalks that are built on both sides. And so within that right-of-way where the highway now exists, you'd have this at-grade arterial. But there's also a difference when they use the community grid word. What they were talking about, their original concept was a boulevard. If you remember that, and I talked about a boulevard. But then they started saying, how's this one road going to handle all the traffic that's up on 81? the community grid says, wait a minute, there's a whole lot of north-south roads that go through downtown Syracuse, right? There's Townsend Street, State Street, Salina Street, and if you're downtown, I'm downtown every day, there's lots of capacity on those streets. Very rarely do you find those streets having a lot of cars on them. So the idea is that you would spread the traffic as you go through downtown Syracuse on any number of the paths that go through downtown Syracuse, not just Almond Street, okay? But Almond Street in particular, you'd have 81, it would come up to, 81 would come down to grade before you get to downtown, go through at grade, and when you get up to Erie Boulevard, you would take a left on Erie Boulevard, and then an immediate right on what is the path of Oswego Boulevard to take you back up to 81. So this is only a 1.4 mile segment of the highway that's brought down to grade, okay? So there it is, traffic goes along Almond and parallel streets. Oh, big part that people don't understand about the community grid, I think. When you bring it down to grade, of course, the Harrison-Adams interchange, as you now know, is gone. But on 690, there's a new interchange built that was going to come off at Krause and Irving. So the traffic that's going primarily to the Hill is going to get off there. So you're basically trading one interchange for another interchange, okay? So it'll be on 690. And I can go show you a little bit more of this. The sections, what is now 81, will be redesignated, okay? But it's a highway. As you think about where you hit 81 south of the, you hit 481 and 81 south of the city, and 81 and 481 north of the city, right? Those 2 points. Those will still be highways as you can't come in for those distance until you get down to the 1.4 mile segment that's at grade. Everything else is highway. So people say, well, if I'm coming in from Cicero every day and I got to go to work downtown, they're going to be on the same highway they're on today, except it's going to be a lane wider. They're going to come off and get off at the exact same place they get off today. They're going to get back on the same place, and it's going to be highway. It's just the viaduct section, the elevated section that goes through downtown, that won't be at a highway anymore, okay? So, and the new piece that's left of 81 will now be designated as Business Loop 81, and we can talk more about that. But you take a lot fewer buildings, the construction cost is a little lower at $1.9 billion, and it takes one less year to build, so it's 5 years to complete the grid.
What's the speed limit on
30 miles an hour. It'll be 30 miles an hour when you come down to the city. So the sections that coming in from the highways will still be 55 until you get down to that only point that's at grade, 30 miles an hour will be the city's
David,
speed limit.
what will be people coming from the south that are directed to what you and I call University Hill? They'll have to get off down there by Martin Luther.
Yes. Down by the Martin Luther King School, there's going to be a new interchange built that will bring you up basically at Van Buren Street. You know where that is, by the Veterans Administration? It'll bring you up there. So if you're coming from the south.
It's just below the dome.
Yeah, that's right. You'll get there you'll have that entrance. If you're coming from the east, you can get off the new 690 interchange. And if you're coming from the north, what you would do is come down, take the community grid through Erie to Almond, and then go up into the hill. Now,
You just have to start 20 minutes earlier.
maybe not. Maybe not. No, let me explain why that. Let me explain why that.
Here we go.
One of the things that highways do is they concentrate traffic, right? Everybody today who's trying to go downtown and working in the Hill or working in the south end of downtown, where do they get off? Harrison and Adams. So it brings all the traffic that's going there down to Harrison and Adams. And so when the viaduct backs up in the morning, which it frequently does, right, that's because you concentrated all the traffic to get off at one point, and then it has Adams Street and Harrison Street to try to disperse. what the grid does is disperse traffic quicker. Think about it. If you were living, you're my resident living in Cicero again, and you work at the Hutchings Psychiatric Center on East Genesee Street, what are you doing today? You're taking the road all the way down to Harrison Adams. You're driving past Hutchings basically when you're going by. You take a left, you have to go back to where your workplace is. And in the afternoon, you reverse that. You go 2 or 3 blocks out of your way to get back on the highway to get up. If the grid is there, once you hit Genesee Street, you're going to turn left. You're not going to go down to Harrison Adams. It's going to pull the traffic away. That's what street grids do. They disperse traffic. That's the only reason the grid will work, is because it disperses traffic.
Can we try it out for a week?
You have been around long enough. I'm pretty sure it was 1993. NISDOT had to reconstruct 81, did a major project, shut down the southbound lanes for like 3 months, and then shut down the northbound lanes for 3 months.
Yo.
And when that was happening, we thought that it was just going to be awful. How are you going to get all those cars in here? And we did all this planning and all this preparation, and all these studies went on. We had brochures we were handing out. There were radio announcements. There was all this stuff about how were you going to get downtown during this terrible time. The first day, it was a mess. Oh, there was traffic everywhere. People backed up. The second day, and the city put a police officer in every corner to try to direct that traffic as best as they could, right? Second day was pretty bad. By the third day, the congestion was gone. Why? Because people figured it out. And this was before the age of GPS, right? But people started figuring out what's my alternative path to get to where I need to go. We put up all this PR and brochures and everything else. Remember OnTrack, the train system? OnTrack ran a special. You could get on in Jamesville and ride downtown and get on the train. They had to give it up. Nobody would do it. Nobody would get out of their car. Because after a set period of time, people figured it out and the traffic was not that bad. The city pulled all its police officers back off all the corners because they had nothing to do. They were standing there. Believe it or not, people figure it out. And that's one of the faiths you can have. Let's look at tunnels. This is the tunnel proposal. There isn't much to see there, but basically the tunnel is under the path of Almond Street. You get rid of the highway infrastructure. It's under here, and you build kind of the boulevard over it. It's hard to see in here, but the tunnel is actually coming out at this point, right? Coming out underground. And so this is the tunnel proposal that was put forward. The state studied 14 different ways to build a tunnel in downtown Syracuse. And in fact, remember the governor set aside a couple $1 million, hired a private consultant, WSP Parsons, the old Parsons Brinkerhoff, one of the biggest engineering firms in the world, who are tunnel experts, and said, design, show me if we can really build a tunnel. If we don't want to trust the experts at NISDOT, can we build a tunnel? And they did a study and said, yes, you can build a tunnel. They didn't engineer it, they didn't say how much, and they didn't say how long, but they said you can build a tunnel. So there are 14 different proposals as to how to put a tunnel through downtown Syracuse. And it's not, I'll tell you, but we'll show you a little bit about what the challenge is with it. So what's the advantages of it? Well, it maintains the high-speed highway through the city. It may or may not be an interstate. It's actually simpler. If it's an interstate, then 81 and 690 have to interchange. That's one of those federal highway rules, okay? You actually have to have a full interchange. If it's a state highway and not an then it doesn't have to interchange. If they didn't want to interchange with 690 except to use city streets. So it'd make it easy for through traffic to bypass downtown. And it would keep through traffic, particularly trucks, off the city streets. I'll just tell you a secret. One of the Achilles heel of the community grid is the truck traffic. Okay? Years ago, a good friend of mine, Frank Hillbilly, who ran Centro, said to me when this whole debate started, David, this is all gonna come down to where the trucks from the west go. I had no idea what he's talking about. I mean, he just kept telling me and telling me. But then I was one day sitting at a red light looking up at I-81, I'm watching, and there goes a tractor trailer, there goes a container, there goes a bus, there goes a construction, there's another tractor trailer. Suddenly realized there's a lot of truck traffic up on that viaduct. Not all traffic is created equal. So where does that truck traffic go if you take down the viaduct? Because right now it doesn't come through downtown because it can easily bypass downtown. If it doesn't want to be there, and we really don't want through truck traffic down on city streets, that's one of the worries with the community grid. Or it should be one of the worries.
Another thing, question. I understand there are certain trucks, particularly that cannot go through a tunnel.
That's correct. Hazardous materials. So if you're carrying something explosive, gasoline, something like that, you can't be in a tunnel. You gotta go around. You can't be down there, okay? So the tunnel, here's some of the downsides of the tunnel, which we'll look at a little bit more in detail. The entrance, ventilation, buildings, construction risk. But basically, they pegged the cost at $4.9 billion. 17 buildings have to come down, and it's going to take 11 years to build it. That was the last estimate by NISDOT. And this is an important thing about a tunnel. People got to remember, tunnels have lights. Tunnels need fresh air, so you got to pump fresh air in. You got to pump automobile exhaust out of them. And you got groundwater. Okay, because you know if you go through that section of downtown, it's very mushy down there. There's a lot of water right there, okay? That has to be paid for because that's not part of what, if you had an elevated highway, you wouldn't have to worry about that. If you have it at grade, you don't have to worry about that. Once you go underground, you got issues. Now, yes, if you're any of the first two, you got to worry about snow removal a little bit more, but you're not going to save much on taking a 1.4 mile stretch out. But there's a lot of operating costs that are associated with the tunnel that are not associated with the other two solutions. So, going back to my roots in Boston, right? I grew up in Boston. What did we do? We took the old central artery, if you remember Boston, and we buried it. And the old central artery, here it is right here, you can't see it anymore. That's the path of the tunnel that goes through downtown Boston to carry that traffic. And they built on top of it the Rose Fitzgerald Greenway, okay? So what you see is a whole series of basically gardens and parks that run through the center of the city of Boston. Let me tell you, it's gorgeous. If you haven't been to Boston, you want to go and see it because it's really, really beautiful because here's the waterfront right here, short walk into the center of the city. If you ever went to Quincy Market before the central artery was taken down, you wanted to walk over to the north end. You had to walk through a little tunnel underneath the central artery. It's disgusting to get to the north end, right? No more. So you can build a tunnel through a center city that looks spectacular when it's done. So what good stuff came out of it? Reduction in vehicle waiting times, right? Not so much traffic. The Greenway is gorgeous. Getting rid of the central artery was transformational. The state said they would build out more mass transit, and the real estate along the path of the Rose Fitzgerald Greenway became the most valuable real estate in Boston. Right? What was bad? It took 8 years longer than people thought it was going to take to build. Its initial cost estimate was $2.8 billion. To ultimately construct it took $14.6 billion, and with interest, it's going to cost $21 billion before everything is paid off. The Federal Highway Administration, remember I said the guys, they typically pay 80% of project costs? Oh, they're not stupid. No. So when the costs began to rise in Boston, probably the third time or fourth time, the state went down and said, oh, well, there's a cost increase. Federal Highway Administration said, we're going to cap it. We'll give you $8.55 billion, because that's what you say it's going to cost us now. The rest of the risk is yours. So what happened? Did the state end up with 20%? Oh, no, 14.6. So the state of Massachusetts had to bail out the cost overrun on the construction of that tunnel. Now they're starting to see congestion coming back, but largely on the suburban highways. They basically, because they had to spend so much money building the tunnel, they didn't have as much, they thought, for surface improvements. And the strange thing happened, even though they built out more transit ridership started falling because it got easier to get into the city. So they had kind of a perverse outcome from that they didn't really want. So what's the trouble with tunnels? The trouble with tunnels is, there's a few things. One is, they gotta come out of the ground somewhere, okay? You think about the tunnel being underground, but tunnels come out. And when they come out, they have to rise slowly, right? The tunnel can't do that. It has to rise slowly. And so what happens to the streets that are on the east or coming across it? You either build a bridge over it, or you cut them off. And the proposal in Syracuse was to cut off Water Street, Washington Street, and Fayette Street as they came through University Hill in downtown Syracuse. Now that's a lot of streets to cut. Kind of goes against the grain of what you're trying to do, of reconnect the city. And there's actually a lot of expensive things like the Center of Excellence in Environmental and Engineering Systems, the Biotechnology Accelerator, they're on those streets. They'd end up on dead ends. And so a lot of concern about cutting those streets. Also, in Syracuse, it would actually be worse than this shows, because where their tunnel, this happens to be in Minneapolis, their tunnel, they have to come up to grade. With us, you got to get 1 story above grade, because 690's up 1 story if you're going to interchange with it. So you'd have ramps coming out of the ground going up, not just back to grade. This is an environmental building in Boston that have to be built, the ventilation structure. There are 9 of these in Boston. There were 2 of these proposed in NISTOT's proposal to build a tunnel in Syracuse. That building is 90 feet high. You can get a sense of it. You see the cars parked over on the right, the tractor trailers over on the left. That is a big building. And why? You've got to get the automobile exhaust out of the tunnel, and you got to pull fresh air into the tunnel. Now you see some shorter tunnels will have fans, like jet airplane fans. It'll blow stuff out at either end. But with a tunnel of this length, NISTOT said you're going to need 2 of these. One would be by St. Joe's, the other would be down close to the Martin Luther King School on the south side. Starts to raise environmental justice issues about where are you putting these things. But you would need at least 2 of these, and you'd have to take up valuable land to build them. The way the tunnel was proposed to be built in Syracuse was a cut and cover at both ends. This is a typical cut and cover construction. You can see the height of the people versus the height of what it looks like as you enter a tunnel. The really critical issue here is the infrastructure. There's a lot of existing infrastructure that goes under Almond Street. Think about it. The Syracuse University steam plant that heats Syracuse University campus and most of the hospitals and provides them chilled water is on the west side of 81. Their lines run under Almond Street up to the hill. You can't touch those, right? They can't break. So you have to relocate. There's a lot of utilities under Almond Street. So one of the reasons why the cost of the tunnel is so high and it takes so long is the amount of time to relocate the utilities before you start building anything. So that's a typical cut and cover work. The middle of the tunnel was proposed to be bored. This is a boring machine. This is from Seattle, okay? They called it Big Bertha, and they used this to build a tunnel in Seattle. Again, you can see the scale of the people versus the size of that. And actually, if you go online, it's really cool. You can watch videos of how this thing works. It is really interesting. So you have to have 2 of these side by side, building your, and they literally bore into the earth. The stuff comes out the other end, is packed up and pulled out of there. In Seattle, they got 1,000 feet into their tunnel. It's the same length as Syracuse's. They got 1,000 feet into their tunnel, and Big Bertha got stuck. Okay? They couldn't back it up. I don't know, they didn't build a reverse gear. They never thought that they might have to back, you know. They couldn't back it out. They had to take 2 years and dig a hole down to get to Big Bertha and pull her out, fix her, and put her back in. Now, once she was in and running, she did that job very quickly. It's done now. But there's some lessons that come out of stuff like that. One is cost matters. Again, same thing, Federal Highway in Seattle made the city of Seattle guarantee what the price would be on the tunnel, and when there were cost overruns, the city of Seattle has to pay it. How are they doing it? Tolls. They're going to toll their tunnel going through Seattle. You learned you can't always trust technology. Big Bertha was spectacular, but she got stuck. And as a good friend of mine put, who worked on this project, he said, strange stuff happens when you go underground. He said, you know, if I build a highway in the air, I can tell you what's in my way when I go to build it. He said, if I build it at surface level, I can tell you what's in my way if I go to build it. But once I go underground, I can't see anymore. And there's stuff under there. And irony of ironies, in the case in Seattle, what they hit was some sort of a pier that Washington State DOT had put in the ground themselves 10 years earlier. They hit their own structure. They didn't even have it on their maps to know it was there. And high water tables, big issue. Same issue is going to be here in Syracuse, right? In Boston and in Seattle. Saline water is particularly tough because what does it do to metal? It rusts it. And in Boston, they didn't think about that. They built the tunnels, and they had the lighting structures above. In about 5 years, those lighting structures started literally falling off the ceiling of the tunnel. They had to spend $54 million to redesign and put them back up again because they rusted. Okay? So saline water, what's Syracuse? Salt City. It's got brine underground. You have to pump that water away from the tunnel. All right, so that's a challenge, and you can't let it near any metal parts that are part of your structure. So that becomes a real challenge with saline water, which is what we've got. Depressed highways. Is there any depressed highway fans in the room? Good. Because everything you need to know about a depressed highway is in that picture. First of all, the name tells you everything you know about a depressed highway. This is Rochester. Rochester's inner loop. They're filling it in. They're getting rid of it. If Rochester's getting rid of it, 90 miles down the road, do we really want to build one here? They have happily replaced that, and they put in a new section that's at grade. Of course, the problem there is you got to cross every street's got to go, so you got to build bridges all the way down it. Those bridges have to be maintained. And now they're saying they're going through a second phase of that, and it's much more controversial because the next phase of the depressed highway in Rochester is used much more than the existing one was that they took out.
What if they just repair the bridge we got now? A man that inspected the bridges, what do you think of that? Repair the bridge.
Yeah. There's a lot of bridge construction and repair that would have to be constantly done in all of this. Now, here's some things they call common features. Initially, these are supposed to be common to all of the solutions you've seen, no matter what. West Street. West Street's on the upper right-hand corner. Picture doesn't really do it justice. Actually, one of the more spectacular visual changes will not, if they do it, will not so much be 81 coming down, will be West Street coming down. West Street is elevated as it goes right there and connects with 690. They're going to bring that down to grade no matter what. So that actually is going to really change the viewpoint as you come into downtown from the west. The missing links. The missing links were to, if you're on 690 and 81, you can't go from 81 north to 690 west without getting on, I think, Bear Street, and you can't go from 690 east to 81 north. I got that bad. Well, you know what I mean. There's two pieces of the interchange that don't exist. The rest of it is all done by ramps. So today you can't do that. The Federal Highway Administration said if these are interstate highways, we want all those ramps built. And that was a concern because that goes through Franklin Square, and that was taking out some of the buildings in Franklin Square in the north side in order to build those ramps. I will say in the current DEIS, I'll jump ahead, they took those ramps out. They said we don't want to do it. We don't want to do that level of demolition. On the bottom right, it shows the new bridges they would have to build. They want to go over Spencer Street, Butternut Street, Bear, and they have to they have to do all these bridges. These bridges, by the way, are less than 10 years old. They have to all come out though and be replaced because the last picture, the highway is going to get wider north of downtown. So they're going to add an extra lane, again, under any of the proposals. So 81 North is going to become 4 lanes wide rather than 3 lanes wide as you come out of downtown. So again, they're adding more traditional highway infrastructure as you come out. Okay, so where are we today? NISDOT just released its draft environmental impact statement. It's several thousand pages long, and I should have come and brought you the reference. It's online, you can find it online. I'm not kidding about the length of it. There's appendices and studies and all sorts of stuff. It's readable, but there's a lot of it. They recommended the community grid option. That's their preferred solution. They eliminated all the tunnels. They said, we do not want, we've tried to do this twice before, and we're telling you again, we're not going to build a tunnel. NISDOT just does not want to think about tunnels.
Does that mean they're not going to build it, or they're not going to fund it?
They don't want to build it because their biggest concern is the construction risk of building a tunnel and then hitting all of that infrastructure that exists already. That's their biggest worry. And remember, they're right up against the hospitals. They are looking for public comment, so you want to say, well, what do I get to do with this? You got to go talk to them now. If you have an opinion on this, now will be the time to talk. Take a look at some of that stuff in the DEIS, and this will be the formal public comment period will be coming up. Now, the DEIS, Draft Environmental Impact Statement, is not the final statement. That's why it's called a draft. The state can change its mind. And a lot of that's going to be dependent on what the public says to them. So if you're a fan of one of the other solutions, you still have a chance to get your 2 cents in there and say, no, I don't want the grid, I want to do something else, or comment on some aspect of it. It's not until they issue the final environmental impact statement and the record of decision as the official term is the final statement of what they want to do. And that will likely be blessed by the Federal Highway Administration before they hand that out.
Excuse me, when you say blessed, does that mean that the Federal Highway Transportation Commission will be the final decision maker?
If they put up 80% of the money, what did you and I talk about before?
The guy with a checkbook is the guy with the make.
The Federal Highway Administration has been involved in this project since day one, 10 years ago. They come to the meetings, they sit quietly in the background, they never say much, but they're there through all the meetings. And so they have been working with the state all the way through this. And I think some of the opposition that comes to the tunnel from NISDOT is actually being directed by Federal Highway. I think they're being told, we're not going to pay for a tunnel.
Would the feds contribute to the $4.9 billion if it's not an interstate?
Yes, because it's still a highway.
They still do 80%.
Well, then a tunnel, they're going to say, what's your price point? Okay, we'll give you $4 billion. But if your price rises to $6 billion, we're not going to give you any more. The state has to find the rest. And keep this in mind too, the state has to pay the other 20%. That's not chump change. On the cheapest of these projects, $1.9 billion, the state share is $380 million. In all of central New York, we get about $100 million of highway money a year. So it means to build the cheapest solution, we're giving up 4 years of work on any other state road in this region. If you go to the tunnel, which is $4.9 billion, the state has to come up with $980 million, 10 years worth of highway funding. Nothing else would get done. So the state, that's one of the reasons the state is very reluctant to go up to that higher number. Okay, real quick. This is the community grid solution. The build out of 481, okay, 481 as you know it today now becomes Interstate 81. There it is. They're going to build out the roads. They're going to change the number of lanes that go through here. There's some places where it's only 2 lanes. They are particularly worried about 690. They're worried about the connections to 3 east and west, they're worried about up to the thruway, so they're going to adjust the lanes. They're also going to build, remember I said at 81 north and south of the city, they're going to turn this, right now it's just a 1-lane connector between the two, they're going to make it 2 lanes. So when you come up, this is what you're going to do if you're just traveling on 81. What they're going to do over here to the east is that this becomes Business Loop 81, and that means more than just a name. It's kind of important what they've designated here. And part of that was a concession to Destiny. Destiny said, we want to still be on 81 when this project is done. So they said, okay, we'll give you a name, it's Business Loop 81. You'll still have the 81 shield. But this, as it comes up, will be all highway from here to here. This is all highway. Then it'll come down to grade for this, and then it becomes all highway again. So understand that most of what's in that business loop is in fact highway. So those are the major changes you'll see. This is not a great, this is an eye chart, but here again is where Almond Street is, where Business Loop would come through. You get on Erie Boulevard, and Pearl Street will bring you back onto the highway just like it does today, and you come off at Oswego Boulevard, so you'll get on and off right there on the north side. And when they talked about a canal district, this is what they're talking about, a revitalization plan called the Canal District right there. This is what the community grid looks like before and after. So the picture at the top is 81 as it goes through over Harrison Adams today. The picture below is showing you what it's going to look like when that bridge is gone. Same thing on the right. There's the existing highway. There's the way it's going to look afterwards. And this is where it comes down on the south side of the city. If you go to the dome, you know where the railroad tracks are that come through there? Yeah. They're going to bring the community grid underneath the railroad tracks at grade. Here's the Martin Luther King School. It's Martin Luther King Boulevard. At this point, it goes back to being a highway. So even though it's at grade, this goes back up to highway speed. And so it kind of gives you a sense of how it's going to interchange south of downtown.
I think you need to, or I would think, if you know where East Castle Street is, that's where Martin Luther King will be jointed up as such. That's where you're going to get off about. Then you're going to scoot back up Van Buren and bang up to the hill at the there.
So there's the comparisons from the summary about construction times, cost. That kind of gives you a rough idea of how they fit in proportion to one another. Again, we talked about this. NISDOT's going to do the community meetings, a public hearing, 45 days of public hearing. Then they're going to do the final environmental impact statement, the record of decision, and then after the record of decision, they're still going to take another 18 months to construct and finance, or design and finance whatever they're going to construct, before they start on that 5 years or 6 years or 11 years.
Give or take. Hold on. Give or take. Give us a date when the first claw will go into the ground and the first bulldozer will come around.
It depends. Get around to it depends. I understand what you're going.
It depends.
It depends. One of the things we talked about, Center State talked about suggesting that, okay, we're going to build a community grid, and that's okay with us, we'll be honest with you, we think that's not a bad idea. There are about 10 things that we'd like to see included in the community grid plan, can't say they're all there, that we call the Community Grid Plus. This was basically the list. We wanted to see more enhancement in terms of what they suggested on 481, which I think they've improved. The common features impact, remember I told you they got rid of the ramps, which we were concerned about because of the demolition. They did keep one lane on 81 North that they want there. We talked about environmental improvements for noise and other barriers along 481 and DeWitt where they needed. Mitigation fund. We want to see some money put aside because no matter what project you pick, there's going to be winners and losers. It just is. So you have to realize that there are people who may get hurt and that's part of what we heard when we went out and talked to everybody. The folks up on 7th North Street, they are worried that they are going to lose business if 81 is brought down to grade. Because they say they get 30% of their traffic is people that don't make reservations and just show up because they're 7th North Street, right at the thruway in 81. And so they're saying if we lose that business, what happens to our hotels? And so part of what we're saying, you got to put money aside because the solution might not be a transportation solution, but what if you build some sort of an economic attraction out by those hotels? Because they can support things and it could generate more business for them. Inclusive employment commitment. Look, this is going to be a federal contract. This is going to be a big federal contract. It's going to get bid on by firms that are located worldwide will come after this job. And so you have to realize that what's their commitment to hiring anybody in Syracuse to do this work, either the contractors or employees. The federal government says, look, you're using federal money, it's a federal project. We don't care if the labor force comes out of Mississippi, Alabama, or Wyoming. It doesn't matter to us. But to us, it kind of matters, right? Because we're putting up with all this, right? Whatever the construction solution is. So we'd like to see some preference given to local contractors. We'd like to see some hiring initiatives for people who live that whole length of that highway. And why not be able to do that? The Revitalization Commission. If you're going to build this road, and you're going to change the way the real estate runs along the road, which they are, we need to think about how are you going to build out something along all of those road segments to help build up the jobs, because we're going to go through a long period of impact. No matter which, it's like Lewis said, right? If you take down 81 just for the construction period, and you shovel all that traffic up to 481 for 2 years, what's going to happen to 7th North Street during those 2 years? What's going to happen to Destiny USA during those 2 years, or 4 years, or 6 years, or 9 years, all right? So we need to think about how are we going to make sure that we don't have a big impact on the economy while we're doing that. Mitigate trucking. The folks out to the west, Skinnyapolis, Auburn, have big time concerns about trucking that goes right through the middle of the village. If you've gone to the village of Skinnyapolis, stand out there for any length of time at the main stoplights, you'll see trucks. And what you're oftentimes seeing are garbage trucks that are coming up from New York City and environs that are hauling stuff to Seneca Meadows. And what they've decided to do is get off 81 down south of Cortland, come up Route 41, brings you right into Skinnyapolis, gets on Route 20 right there, and it takes you right to Seneca Falls, and that's the shortest route to Seneca Meadows. So they have been upset for some time about the level of trucking that comes through their village, okay? So, and they keep saying, why can't these folks use 81 in the thruway? Because nobody can make them use 81 in the thruway. They're public streets. They have the right to be there. But we need to find a way to mitigate that impact. There are legal ways to do that. And we really need to watch what's going on with the Seneca Meadows landfills. It is slated to close in 2025, which should eliminate the problem. But already in Seneca Falls, there's thoughts about renegotiating, giving them a longer time to exist. But if that renegotiation takes place, we really need to say something about, well, how are those trucks getting there, right? Maintenance fund, particularly if you're going to build a community grid. Those are city streets. Who's going to fix them 10 years from now? We want the state to guarantee.
Who's going to fix them now?
Well, the state will fix them now. That will be our advantage. But what happens 10 years from now when they need to be fixed again? Traffic coordination, signal enhancements. Right? You have signals down. If you're going to traffic signals, what happens? You have a green light and a red light, a green light, red light, right? Stop, go, stop, go, stop, go. Those signals can be coordinated to allow traffic to flow, so there's a consistent green signal. If you're traveling at speed, you should be able to get a fairly consistent green signal. What we have here is that the city of Syracuse has a traffic system, synchronized signals. The state of New York has a traffic synchronized signal system. They exist side by side and they don't synchronize with one another. That's why you hit that. In Rochester, they brought all that together. And they got one central place where all the traffic signals are coordinated. The state NISDOC's engineers told us if we just had coordinated signals, if we did nothing else, the traffic around downtown Syracuse would move 30% better, more efficiently. That's how much time is being lost, that lack of coordination. We need to fix that. And construction process improvements, using design build, using anything that will help move this along a little bit faster than it's going. County exec and the mayor said, look, county exec was not in favor of the community grid, but he's basically sent the message, look, let's start working on what the mitigation should be. Congressman Katko has basically sent the same message. Tell me what you need in order to mitigate. He actually, and Congressman Katko has said, and let me go jump a piece ahead. Why might they be saying that? There's the Highway Trust Fund, the Federal Highway Trust Fund. All right? The Highway Trust Fund is how we pay, when you pay your gas tax at the pump, it goes into the Highway Trust Fund. And those dollars are used to build improvements. Those are where the federal dollars come from. What's happening is that the balance in the Federal Highway Trust Fund keeps falling faster. They're taking more money out than they're putting in order to build these projects. So, and Congress has to bail it out every once in a while. Right now, the Federal Highway Trust Fund is scheduled to go insolvent in 2021. Just about the time that we get there and say, okay, we're ready to build. Sorry, no more money. So they're worried about that because they're worried that, okay, Central New York finally comes to a consensus or at least an agreement, even if people don't love it, and then we can't finance it. National Highway Cost Construction Index, why do we care? Well, if you go back to 2008, run for 10 years, the cost of highway construction has gone up roughly 4.4% a year. So if you take the cheapest project, the community grid at $1.9 billion, 1 year of delay costs $83.6 million. That's no joke. That's real money. For the viaduct, it's almost $100 million for every year of delay with construction costs rising. We're wasting our governmental funds, folks. That's what we're doing, as long as we can't come to a consensus. One last point, and I'll be done, because I've gone on too long. I love this picture. This is New York City back in April 15th of 1900. If you look closely at that picture, you will see there is one automobile on the street, and everything else is horse-drawn vehicles. Exactly 12 years later, the same shot, there is one horse and carriage, and everything else is automobiles. This is about technology. We have to realize while we're talking and debating about building highways, technology is changing in mobility, how people move around. Right? Autonomous cars. This is no joke. Look at all the major automobile manufacturers telling you when they are going to start putting major autonomous car, are going to be a major part of their vehicles that they're going to put on the road. There's their times of introduction. And so by the time 2035, 12 million fully autonomous units, 18 million partially autonomous units.
I'm gonna be 102 years old.
Did you see it?
What's the cost of 481?
Say again?
What's the cost for 481?
I
You're
don't
not
have that
including
number.
that into this.
It is in those numbers. It is in the 1.9, the 2.2, and the 4.9. It is in there. But you're asking a good question, which I can't answer, what is the 481 improvement cost of that piece?
And that's in the 1.9.
It's in all those. Yeah, it's in all those. So, if you build fully autonomous vehicles, remember we have to say the road had to get wider and straighter in order to be safer. Fully autonomous vehicles, you might get the safety improvement without the highway being wider and straighter. So today we're designing something and we may not have to build that by the time the thing gets there. Just something to think about.
And what about coverless?
Shows you how fast they're being adopted. Electric vehicles. So what's the implication? There are more and more cars going to electric vehicles. As vehicles move towards zero emissions, vehicle miles traveled. The folks who do not like the grid push back hard on vehicle miles traveled because they say you're going to ship people around the city. That means there's going to be more vehicle miles to go around, and each one of those cars is exhausting stuff out its back end. And so the environmental impact of making them take a longer route is fairly significant. Well, what happens if we go to electric cars? Well, then it's where the electric utility generating capacity is. That's where you control emissions. You don't have to control them from the individual vehicles anymore. So that's going to have an impact. Car sharing, right? You Uber, Lyft, or a Zipcar in this case, where you can lease the cars. It's predicted that over time, more and more people will give up on the idea of owning their own vehicle. You don't need it all the time. You got to remember that. I think it's like 90% of the time that you have your vehicle, it's parked. Parked overnight, parked when you go to work, it's parked. If you only need it to go back and forth on a regular route, it may be cheaper for you to car share rather than to own a vehicle. Not quite there yet, but we're getting to that point. And so if you don't have so many cars and so much downtime, you need less space for parking along city streets, right? You could build more bike lanes, you could do other things if you can eliminate a lot of the time that people have cars that are just sitting there parked, taking up room. It's just the technology and social changes. That's it. So I just want to kind of give you, this is what's all going on in the background. We have to think about those technological changes while we're thinking about all this, because the worst thing in the world for us is to build a piece of infrastructure that is obsolete on the day we open it.